The people who have been encouraging it will rue the day when this gets more out of control down the line. I've heard all of the arguments about compassion and humanity
that Charles is so seems to be so angry about.
You'll find, first of all, it's Douglas.
Sorry,
and secondly, that it's not irregular.
Just let me finish.
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. Today we are going to be watching Douglas Murray debate the CEO of the Refugee Council, Enver Solomon. Now, multiculturalism is very topical at the moment and will continue to be as Europe continues to crumble. And in this video, I'm going to provide a pretty comprehensive look at that issue. And this is a debate from 2 years ago where, in my opinion, Douglas Murray's arguments age like an unboxed Rolex, whilst Enver's arguments age like a carton of milk left out in the sun. So looking forward to reading your thoughts, and let's get into it.
Context is really important here. The overall context is that the numbers coming to this country seeking asylum over the last few years and over the last decade has been declining, and it's important to recognise that.
Several things about that. One is, of course, it's not surprising that asylum claims were down last year because most of the world was in lockdown, and it's very hard to draw the trajectory of the last decade, not least also because the movement you're talking about, of course, in the previous decade under Labour was significantly to do with intra-EU migration. It was to do with the British government losing control of Britain's borders, in part because of our membership of the EU. One of the things that caused the British public to vote to leave the EU in 2016 was the idea that the British government would be more capable of controlling the British borders after leaving the EU than it was before. So that's why it's a particular political problem for this government. Movement and migration ebbs and flows. But if after a government has been mandated by the public with tidying up its asylum and immigration system, and in fact is seen to be losing control of it in such a visible way, then I think this is a problem. And just one other point on this, which is that it's important, of course, to bear in mind that this whole issue of the signal that you give out as a country. The people who are trying to cross the channel illegally at the moment have gone through multiple safe countries before doing so. They do not have to come to Britain. They are choosing to come to Britain. They do not have to pay the smuggling gangs thousands of pounds to go across the channel. They are choosing to do that and choosing to leave safe EU countries. And if the government in the UK encourages that movement, then, as I say, the number of people who will like to follow is limitless, because we are talking here not just about people who are fleeing, for instance, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, but, as we saw recently in a surge of arrivals the other week, people from Vietnam, for instance. There are people from sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, across the world, people who are suffering economic deprivation, who would like to come to the UK, and who the UK cannot allow to come.
But just on that, Douglas, as you just put across there, but also in his cover piece, talks about the fact that the current arrangement privileges those who can afford entry, can afford to make that journey, and also encourages people smugglers. Do you agree with that?
Look, I think it's really important here to understand the context. Even when we had inward migration from the EU, the main countries of those nationalities coming here seeking asylum were not from the European Union. That was a separate migration challenge. This is an issue which goes back right to when this country, and we're talking about it on a very significant day, 7 decades since this country, along with other countries, put its name to the UN Convention on Refugees. And Conservative Prime Ministers since Churchill, all the way up to David Cameron, have stuck to a very important principle. And that principle is that those people who come to this country claiming that they need protection should be given a fair hearing on UK soil. And if they need protection, they should be given it. And if they don't need protection, they should be sent back. And indeed today, in the front line, in the fight against COVID, if you look at people working in the NHS, there are Afghan doctors who had no choice but to get here in the back of a lorry. There are people who came from Iran fleeing oppression, who are top-level surgeons. And indeed, if you look across the arts, if you look across education, if you look across business, there are many refugees who are making an incredible contribution to this country, proud to be Britons, playing by the rules, paying their taxes and contributing to this country in an incredible way. And it's very important that as a nation, we continue 7 decades after the UN Convention to stick to that key principle that, as I say, many Conservative prime ministers have continued to stick to, which is if you come here with a case for refugee protection, you are given a fair hearing.
There are 2 important things to say about that. The first is just to address the fiction that the arrivals coming over by boat from France are all going to end up being surgeons, doctors, leading academics and statisticians and much more. And it's not the case. It's the fantasy of the pro-open borders lobby that everyone...
Charles, can I just say, sorry to interrupt, but I'm not advocating pro-borders. What I'm simply advocating, if you let me finish, please, Charles, come on, you've had a lot to say. What I'm advocating is the UN Convention on Refugees. Now, the UN Convention on Refugees, just let me finish. Please let me make my point. I'm not interrupting you.
So we just witnessed Mr. Enver Solomon calling Douglas Murray Charles, not once, but twice.
Charles, please, Charles.
And you can tell that he meant it, guys, because when he said it, he laughed and then leaned back as if he just said something very naughty.
You've had a lot to say.
And then he somehow keeps a straight face when saying, I didn't interrupt you, after literally interrupting him 3 seconds ago.
Sorry to interrupt. Please let me make my point. I'm not interrupting you.
Now, this is either pure gaslighting by our friend Enver, or he's not exactly pulling a full wagon, if you will. Either way, not a good look. And I'll say this, I would recommend calling Douglas Murray Charles in a debate as much as I would recommend walking up to Mike Tyson in his prime and calling him a bitch. Hey, Mike, come on. You see, Douglas Murray is practicing restraint during this exchange, but he hasn't forgotten. But if you guys watch the channel regularly, you'll know that this is nothing new for Douglas. And it's not even the first time they've gotten his name wrong. You'll remember Malk.
Well, Malk.
And if you're from Europe, you'll be aware of the immigration madness that has forever changed the continent. These once beautiful, majestic, romantic cities like Paris and Rome will never be the same. And that is devastating for the world. And this is because of the media and because of politicians, because of the woke mind virus and this notion that Western countries need to self-flagellate and need to decolonize and need to repent for the sins of their past by accepting vast swathes of refugees. But also, I think that bureaucrats like Enver are just as much to blame.
The UN Convention on Refugees is very clear, and it upholds the principle that if you are fleeing oppression, war, terror, and you come to this country, you can make a claim for protection. And indeed, we have done that for decades. There are many people across this country who've come from Afghanistan. Indeed, we brought together refugees early this week across 7 decades, people that had fled Idi Amin in Uganda, people that had fled Hungary and the communist totalitarian regime. All individuals that came here made a claim for protection under the UN Convention and were given protection. What I'm advocating is that we adhere to that. By no means am I advocating open borders, because if people don't have a legitimate claim for protection or a need for protection, absolutely they should be sent back to the country from which they had come from, and they should be supported to do that.
I'm very glad to hear you say that, but yet you're encouraging the breaking of the law and the breaking of the asylum procedures by advocating, or indeed encouraging, the illegal movement of people across the channel. And as I say, we have an asylum system. I think
the UN Convention is not breaking the law.
You said a moment ago that you hadn't interrupted me, and you just have again.
Guys, if you're enjoying this video, if you like these longer form breakdowns, I would appreciate it if you took a second out of your day to quickly chuck a like on this one, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Back to the clips.
It's extremely deleterious for our country to be in a situation where we encourage the breaking of the law by migrants who you then pretend afterwards are going to never break the law again and are all going to become doctors and surgeons. But let's just address the bigger issue, which is a fundamental one, which is that you know as well as I do that UN Convention for the UK is a polite fiction. It relies on of it not being the case that very many people are going to make it to the UK and then claim asylum. The people you talked about who come from, for instance, Afghanistan have, as I say, walked across multiple safe countries. They are looking at Europe as a buffet that they choose from, not as a haven to try to reach. And it is exceptionally important that we as a country understand this in the modern context. You keep talking about context. Let's address the context. The context we're in now is very different from that 7 decades ago. We have not just the ability to see how the rest of the world is living through our smartphones and much more, and people across Africa have these devices, but we can go and move around much more easily than at any time previously. In the current era, there are people from across the Middle East, the Far East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, all wishing to move to Europe, and Britain is one of the countries they would like to come to. 1/3 of people in Sub-Saharan Africa polled by Gallup last year said they would like to move. They do not want to move to the Middle East, they want to move to Europe, they want to move northwards. Now, my suggestion is that in that context, Britain has to be realistic about what our capabilities are of providing a haven for the world's poor, dispossessed, and much more. I think we are a small country. We should have small ambitions about this. We cannot be the haven for anyone in the world who wishes to have a better life to come in and try to make that better life here. It's impossible. But as I say, we've been running on the polite fiction of recent decades, and I'd like us not to keep up that fiction.
And just on that, do you think the current situation is sustainable? If we look at the current numbers, is that a situation that can go on?
Well, the numbers are down, but, I'm not interested in arguing about numbers. I'm interested in us as a nation approaching this with compassion.
He's not interested in looking at the numbers. He is interested in compassion. Wow. What a good person he is. Just so much kindness and compassion. I can actually feel the compassion coming through the computer and just holding me and embracing me and telling me that it's not my fault.
Don't f*** with me, all right? Don't f*** with me, Sean, not you. It's not your fault.
If only these people had the same level of compassion for those in their country. This is exactly the problem, guys. Feelings over fact. Going woke and going broke. And many won't like to hear this, but I also believe that this is a result of the feminization of our culture and our politics. This leads fully grown men who supposedly have testicles to say things like, I'm not interested in the numbers, I'm interested in compassion. Bro, what? This man needs a wedgie.
Oh, Morgan. Oh, good. Old school wedgie. Oh, that does not tickle.
And this is why, generally speaking, men are better leaders. And it starts on the micro that men need to be leaders of their relationships. Let's not beat around the bush. I mean, if a woman is the leader of her relationship, she will be absolutely miserable and she will end up hating the man. She needs to be able to respect him and believe that he is benevolent, competent, and a provider. And every relationship that I've ever had, big or small, reinforces this idea for me. This is also true at the family level. The data shows that having a father in the home is the most important thing when it comes to the outcome of the child. Single mother homes are the most likely to produce criminals, etc. This also translates to the business level. I mean, there are certainly women who are capable, but generally speaking, when you walk into a boardroom of CEOs, it's going to be mostly men who are absolute savages. And I don't think it's because women are oppressed and because society. I think it's biological hardwiring, and all of the socio-cultural, historical, and behavioral evidence suggests this. And then on the national level, this is also true in the sense that women are much more susceptible to a compassionate narcissist. Obama. They tend to be less worried about what was said and more worried about how they said it. And Donald Trump's an interesting case here because I think a lot of women love him because he's an alpha, competent, strong leader. And then you get the more liberal feminist women who deep down also love him, whether they know it or not, but they try and hide their love for him by saying that they don't like the way he says things. It's not what you said, it's how you said it. Come on, fellas. We've all heard it before. And ladies, you know what I'm talking about. Let's all just be honest with each other here. And once cultures become more wealthy and liberal and metropolitan and woke, we start to see quotas emerge. We start to see a lot more female influence, and we start to see the compassion over numbers narrative proliferate. Do you think that Putin or Xi or any of the other global rivals that we have on the world stage give a damn about the diversity within their cabinet? I don't think so. It's more a matter of who is the most savage, who is the most competent, and who is the most effective. And I know when you hear this, it might not sound fair or nice, but unfortunately the world isn't fair or nice. And the hard truth is that traits that predict success in the marketplace and success on the world stage for that matter are not feminine traits. And I think that we are seeing that in full swing. And it's certainly not to say that everything is just women's fault. That is not what I'm saying, because men are not doing their job as leaders. Men have been completely pussified. I mean, you ladies know how much I love you. You make little people inside you, and you give us perspective, and you bring tenderness and warmth to our cold hearts. You're just not very good leaders, that's all. And you might be thinking to yourself, I'm a lady, I've done X and Y in my life, I'm an extremely capable leader, and I have absolutely no doubt that that is true. But if you could have a competent man doing it, who's a great problem solver, who makes you feel secure and protected, would you do it? I mean, I know that me and the guys that I know are happy to take that role, happy to give all of our time and effort to provide. And when we get invaded, we will stand in front of the bullets and go in the trenches while you guys hold it down at home. And when the Titanic sinks, we'll put you guys on the life rafts with the children, paddle away while we stand there with the sorry bastards with the violins. And sink down to the bottom of the freezing cold ocean. So we've got our ups and downs on both sides, so why don't we all just do what works best? Anyways, rant over. Back to immigration.
You know, Australia, Greece, Denmark, these are all also very distinguished liberal democracies. They all have a fine liberal tradition, and they've also realized that they can hold on to the principle of legality and of borders, and that they can do so without anyone but a relatively small fringe of people claiming that they are some kind of beyond the pale countries.
And for which of those options do you think has merit?
Well, I think this is a global issue, very much in the way that climate change is a global issue. And of course, it's a challenge for every Western government when you have people who are being displaced on the scale that we do have globally today, you know, millions and millions of people being displaced through no fault of their own. And indeed, if there was displacement in Europe and Europeans were being subject to what is happening in other continents, I think Europeans would expect the rest of the world to respond in a compassionate way too. So globally, we have to think about how we address this huge challenge. And the challenge will continue, no doubt, going forward into the future years, into the future decades. And it requires Western governments to come together in the way that they're doing over climate change and to think about a solution that reflects the principles that nations have abided by and stuck to and supported since the horrors of the Second World War. Principles that are about humanity, that are about recognizing that we are a global community and we respond appropriately to support fellow humans when they're in crisis and when they're in need of support. And they need to come together and form a multilateral agreement to respond to that right across Europe, because it's a challenge, as Douglas says, for European nations. But that response needs to be based on principles, as I say, of humanity and compassion, principles that many, many nations, many of those liberal democracies that Douglas refers to, are very proud to sign up to. And that's what needs to drive the response to this crisis, in the same way that governments are coming together to use a set of principles in response to the climate crisis.
I agree that this is a global crisis, but I think that people talking about Britain's borders very rarely have any idea of the global scale of it. When people talk about the need for compassion and humanity, I don't think anyone is anti-compassion or anti-humanity. I think these are very easy ways to browbeat people into accepting the breaking of the laws of the country that they're in. It is not a British tradition or anything of which Britain needs to be proud to pretend that Britain is not Britain unless we allow the breaking of the law in our asylum and immigration policies. The fact that historically Britain has on occasion been able to give sanctuary to really very significantly small numbers of people in our history is a reflection that we're a small island with relatively small resources in the global scheme of things. And when people say that we need to come together to answer this, I agree with this. Britain, however, cannot be the resort of choice for anybody in the world. As I say, we've had the example of people coming from Vietnam again the other day across the channel. For anyone across the Far East, the Middle East, the Near East, Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, and everywhere else in the world where they are not having the life they would like. Some people are fleeing war zones, absolutely. The majority are fleeing economic deprivation. And it is a very negative idea indeed, to my mind, to pretend and to console our consciences by pretending in any way that Britain can answer all of these problems. We cannot. What we can do is make things an awful lot worse in Britain and in France and in neighbouring EU countries by adhering to a polite lie that it is remotely in Britain's gifts to solve all of the problems that exist in the world. And as I say, in particular by pretending that as well as the legal asylum system we have, we should also have a parallel asylum system, an illegal one, where whoever gets across the channel first in a boat wins entry into Britain. I think it's a great mistake, and the people who have been encouraging it will rue the day when this gets more out of control down the line. It is something that will need to be addressed. And if it isn't, we've seen in the last decade what happens. I've heard all of the arguments about compassion and humanity made by compassionate and pseudo-humanitarian figures across Scandinavia, Mediterranean Europe. They all said in the last 10 years, let them come, let us answer the woes of the world. And then it got way out of hand and they had to crack down and snap back. Of course they did, because surprise, surprise, it's not in Denmark's gift to sort out the world's woes. It's not in Sweden's gift, not in Italy's gift, and it's not in Britain's either.
Douglas mentioned there that encouraging immigration has been a great mistake, and the people who have been encouraging it will rue the day when this gets more out of control down the line. And ladies and gentlemen, the rubber has officially met the road with this one, and let me give you a few reasons as to why I think that's the case. Like I mentioned, the cities aren't the same. I've met multiple people in the last week that have left their homes because they can't bear to live there with what they've become. People from Germany and from Sweden in particular. We saw this whole National Day of Jihad narrative that sent Europe into a panic over the last week.
A former head of the terror group Hamas designating Friday, October 13th, the Day of Jihad.
Because the potential implications, if something like that were to ever materialize on a large scale, is quite terrifying. Furthermore, we've seen huge pro-Palestine demonstrations over the last week or so, and some of these protesters have been very pro-Hamas, virulently anti-Semitic, and celebrating the atrocities that we saw and encouraging more.
It's a massacre of innocent civilians, and it should be strongly condemned, and instead they're here celebrating this.
They said at the beginning of this protest, they said that our people broke down the barrier, everyone cheered. The terrorists got into Israel, killed 1,000 people. Is that what they're celebrating?
And now we have these countries that welcomed all of these refugees and migrants with open arms, setting their police on the protesters. These governments who wanted the diversity and loved the diversity because the diversity was a strength are all of a sudden surprised and not so thrilled about this kind of diversity. What did they expect? I'm sorry, but if you were a part of the Compassion Brigade and you thought everything was going to be kumbaya, you have no right to complain now. The only people who have the right to complain are individuals like Douglas. And we are seeing the situation only intensify as time goes on. We saw just a few weeks ago, I think it was just at the end of last month, the 15,000 or so architects and doctors that arrived on the shores of Lampedusa, most of which coming from places in sub-Saharan Africa. Furthermore, even Angela Merkel, who led in 1 million people to Germany, has come out and said that multiculturalism has failed.
Multiculturalism Multiculturalism has failed. Chancellor Angela Merkel's bleak assessment of attempts to integrate immigrants into German society.
And Henry Kissinger, who God knows how he is still alive, just this week came out and said pretty much the same thing.
It was a grave mistake to let in so many people of totally different cultural and religious and concepts, because it creates a pressure group inside each country that does that.
We're reaching a point now where this is putting an immense strain on not only the economics and the resources of these countries, but also the morale. And Enver was laughing at Douglas here when he was saying that they would rue the day. I wonder if he's laughing now. You know, it must have been difficult being lambasted and called a racist for all of those years for individuals like Douglas Murray, like Nigel Farage, and like Paul Joseph Watson, who's the only YouTube channel that I think I've watched every single one of his videos. I mean, these guys have gone against the woke grain and have been relentlessly strawmanned, called bigots and all of the other pejoratives that you can possibly think up for saying, hey, you know what, actually, I'm proud to be British. I don't hate my country. In fact, I love it the way it is. And I'm not overly keen on forever changing the demographics and inviting millions of people here who don't only not like our values, they actually hate our values. Our values are antithetical to their values. They suggested that Britain maybe try and maintain what makes it Britain, only to be met by a chorus of indignation by the woke mob. And they've even given better solutions, such as the more humane solution of helping these nations where they're at. And I want to share with you guys some highlights from this fantastic talk by a man named Roy Beck.
Some people say that mass immigration into the United States can help reduce world poverty. Is that true? Well, no, it's not. And let me show you why. This gumball represents the 1 million legal immigrants that the United States has taken every year on average since 1990. And how many people make less than $2 a day in the world? Well, let's start with Africa. In Africa alone, there are 650 million people who make less than $2 a day. 650 million. And in India, another 890 million people, desperately poor. China adds another 480 million people, making less than $2 a day. And unfortunately, the rest of Asia has a heartbreaking 810 million people who the World Bank says make less than $2 a day. And finally, there's 105 million of Latin America's population that are desperately poor. All told, the World Bank says there are 3 billion people in the world, 3 billion people who are desperately poor, making less than $2 a day. That's 3,000 gumballs. And every year, we take 1 million and suggest that we've somehow made a humanitarian difference. 5.6 billion people in the world who live in countries with average incomes below that of Mexico. That's 5,600 gumballs. And so what is it that the elites are telling us? They're telling us that when we take this 1 million immigrants, that we somehow or another are tackling world poverty. And we have to do it regardless of the effect on our unemployed, the working poor, the most vulnerable members of our society, regardless of the effect on our natural resources. Even if we went by the most radical proposals in Washington, which are to actually double our immigration to 2 million a year, which would totally overwhelm our physical, natural, and social infrastructures, we couldn't make a noticeable difference. And we may be really hurting the impoverished people of the world, because the million that we do take are among the most energetic, often the better educated, certainly the most dissatisfied people that if they did not immigrate would be the agents for change. The impossibility of making even a dent is actually worse than it looks here. Because last year, when we took 1 million immigrants, these countries added births over deaths, 80 million more people into the impoverished population. And this year, Congress is bringing in 1 million legal immigrants. And this year, according to the United Nations, these countries are expected to add another 80 million people. We'd never get ahead of what's happening in these countries, not in this century. Don't you see? Immigration can never be an effective or significant way to deal with the suffering people of the world. They have to be helped where they live. 99.9% of them will never be able to immigrate to a rich country. There's no hope for that. They have to bloom where they're planted. The only place that 99.9% of these people can be helped is where they live. Let's help them there.
So I'll leave the full link to that below, guys. Apologies if I didn't credit whoever sent that to me. It might have been one of you guys a few months back. But that has to be the most accurate and logical approach to immigration I've ever seen. Not only is it completely useless in terms of solving global poverty, you could argue that it's actually worse for those countries, and then weakening the stronger countries in the world also weakens our ability to be able to help those countries in need. And now let's watch Enver push the envelope a little bit too much with trying to call Douglas Charles again.
It's in the world's gift to respond to global challenges in the way that we're responding to the climate challenge. And of course, it's in the world's gifts and the gift of democratic nations to respond to this challenge. And I'm not suggesting that Britain opens its borders. I'm simply suggesting that as a nation, we uphold a principle that we have stuck to for 7 decades, which is giving protection to those who need it. Those that come across the channel are not all economic migrants. Some of them will be, but if you look at the main nations that they're coming from Syria, they're coming from Eritrea, where there's a huge issue with refugee camps due to the war in Ethiopia and the civil struggle in Ethiopia. They're coming from Iraq. We know the situation in Iraq. And they're coming from a highly oppressive regime in Iran. We need to give them the opportunity to have their case heard. And if they merit protection, we should give them protection in the way that we have done for many, many decades. And the communities that have settled in this nation as a consequence of our commitment to refugee protection have made a huge contribution to this nation. Indeed, if you look at parliaments, you could track back through many parliamentarians' lives and families those refugees that have come here. Indeed, our Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, is one example of that.
On that, Emma,
Sorry, one very quick point. There's a massive fallacy on this, which is that because you have some benefits from some migrants through migration, that an answer is the more people come, the more benefits will accrue. And it's simply not the case. None of the data bears that out, because as well as the good news stories that Enver has just described, there are also very many bad news stories. And for every one person who contributes to the economy by becoming a surgeon, many others will be going into the black market, will be living very unhappy lives in Britain on the margins of society that they have entered into by first of all consorting with smuggling gangs and then entering the black economy. And I just am fed up of having spent years hearing people pretending that if you make it to a country like Britain, you will end up inevitably in the position of surgeon or academic. It's a terrible falsehood built upon an existing falsehood, which, as I say, is our asylum aims of recent decades.
And just finally on that, I mean, in your work, you offer support to those coming to the country. What do you think is the case when reality meets what people have expected in advance?
I mean, the reality is all those people we work with, when they come here, whether that's through so-called regular routes or the irregular routes that Charles is seems to be so angry about.
You're right, first of all, it's Douglas.
Sorry,
and
Douglas.
And secondly, that it's not irregular route.
Just let me finish. The irregular routes.
Good, I just want you to get my name right first.
Sorry, I do apologise. That was my oversight. It wasn't an intended mistake. Sorry, Douglas.
So there you have it, guys. Sometimes it is harder to speak the truth, especially when you're being bombarded with virtue signaling, woke, fake compassion propaganda. But I think it's worth it. And hey, certainly it's a wild ride. So with that, if you guys would like to support the channel, join the locals community, you can do that below. You can also join my Telegram, and my link tree will take you to all of my socials if you want to come and say hi. And also, if you want to subscribe to the channel, you can click right here. If you want to watch another video, right here. Until next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.